G'day everyone and welcome back to part 2 of our Postman series. In this video we'll take a look at some of the fundamental yet very important functionalities that Postman provides to us. Mainly throughout this video you'll be learning about what collections are, we'll take a look at what environments are used for, and you'll also learn how to set up your very first environment variable. So let's get started. So let's talk about collections. First of all, what is a collection? So Postman collections can be found here on your sidebar, and they are essentially a group of your saved requests. So every request that you send in Postman will appear under the history tab of the sidebar, which is here. And in the short term, reusing the request through the history section can be convenient. However, as your Postman collection and usage will grow, it can become quite time consuming to have to keep scrolling through all of these to find a particular request that you're looking for. So instead of doing this, we can save all of our requests as a group for easier access. So think of it as the way that you would organize your documents on your computer, right? Hopefully you're not like my mum who saves every file to her desktop and then spends 10 minutes just trying to figure out where each file is. Hopefully you have folders and then you save documents or a group of documents inside of a folder which all relate to each other. So this is what we call a collection in Postman, and having an organized collection is essential to keep your workspace clean, to make it readable, and to have everything easily accessible and at the ready. So let's just do a quick recap of that. So collections are a group of saved requests. They help you organize yourself when your Postman usage increases, and it's important to have them to keep everything clean, readable, and easily accessible, right? So these are the requests that I've imported from RESTful Booker. If you watched the first video in this series, you'll know how to do an import of a request. And if you want to create a new collection, you can just go ahead and click this little plus icon right there. And you can give a collection a name as well. Okay. And then under the header, if you open that, you can add your requests. And that's how you would get started in creating your collections. Now that we have a better understanding about collections, we can move into environments. So what is an environment? Essentially, an environment is a set of variables that you can use in your Postman requests. To give you a more real-world scenario, it's highly often that as a QA, you'll need to test your APIs on multiple environments. On these environments, you might have different endpoints, different request URLs, different usernames, passwords, authorization tokens, all of that good stuff. So there will be some values which change based on the environment and some that will stay the same. So what we want is the values that do change. So these ones that do change can be grouped together and set into an environment. So let's take a look at what that would look like in practice. Alrighty, so let's jump back into Postman and take a look at how we can create an environment and how we can actually use an environment that we've created. So for this example, you can access your environments either by clicking on the little eye icon here and you can click on add, or you can come here to your environments, which is where you'll see all the environments that you've created in your workspace. So let's just click here to create a new environment. We can give it a name. Okay. And basically now we can get started. So as you can see, we have the initial value here and we have the current value in our environments. So let's not focus too heavily on these at the moment. It's just important to note that the initial value is synced with your account via the Postman servers, and it's shared with team members you might be collaborating with who also have access to your environment. The current value is used in your local instance of Postman, and it will never be synced to your account or shared with your team unless you choose to do so. So since we're just on a personal workspace here, let's just ignore these for now. One thing which is important to note though is that if you do leave the current value empty, by default Postman will copy the initial value and use it as the current value. Okay, so for this example, we've given our environment a name, and as I said before, you'll have values which change depending on the environment you're using. So let's take a couple of those common things. Let's say the URL that you're accessing, the username, and the password. So let's go ahead and set those up. So here is where we input our variables. This is where we input their names. So I'm just going to call this one the base URL. I'm going to call this one username and password. And it's important to remember what you name them because this is how you'll be accessing them later on throughout your collections. So let's go back to our create token request. And here we have the URL that we're accessing. So what I can do is I can copy this, put it into the initial value, my username, and my password. Okay, so as you can see, I put everything into initial value and it got copied over here to the current value. So let's just save everything. And now let's go back into our collection. Great. So now that we have that set up, first of all, how do we access it? Well, up here, you have a little drop down and you can select the environment that you've just created. This is where you'll be able to find all of the environments that you create in the future, or you can come over here into the side panel and click on the environments header. And once we create more, you'll see that they all have a little check mark next to them. And if you tick that, you can set it as the active or inactive environment. At the moment, it's just easier to look here. As we can see that here we have QA environment selected. Awesome. So we have it selected, but how do we use it? Okay, in Postman, the way that you would use an environment variable is by opening two squiggly brackets. So we can remove this because basically what we've done is we've set this up as a variable. Let's open two squiggly brackets and we can call the base URL variable here and close your squiggly brackets. If you've typed it incorrectly, Postman will give you a little visual aid just so that you can make sure that you input your variable name correctly. So if you want to type it by hand, you can do that, or if you want to do this, you can just copy it over, and that way you're not going to make any mistakes. Awesome. Now let's send the request and see what happens. Cool, that was pretty quick and it worked. So we can see here we've generated a new token, and if we look here at what's actually happening is we're telling Postman to use these variables instead of using the hard-coded data that we had there in the first place. Awesome. Now let's take everything that we've learned one step further. So now that we have these environment variables for the QA environment, we can look into what your Postman workspace might look like in a real-world scenario when you have 2, 3, or even 4 environments to test on. So let's go back to the Environments tab, create a new one, and we'll call it Pre-Production, and we'll set up the same 3 variables as we had in the QA environment. So to do that, I can come here to the side panel, click the plus button, and give it a new name. Awesome. And let's set up base URL, username, and password. Cool. And let's pass the same values as we had on the QA environment, but it's a different environment, so it'll have a different URL. Okay. My username has also changed, so okay. Now let's save that. And please keep in mind that these won't actually work when I send the request to the server because these values don't actually exist. I'm just doing this to give you an idea of what it would look like if you were using a workspace with multiple environments. So let's go over here to collections, our create token, and let's take a look at how easy it is as well to switch over to a new environment. So we had the QA environment, and if we have a request now that we need to send on a different environment, the pre-production environment, all we have to do is click over here. As I said, in the environments tab, you also have this little check mark and you can see which one you have active. So we can switch between them very quickly like this as well. For me, it's just easier to switch from up here. Okay, so let's go back to create token and let's see this fail. Basically what's happening here is we've switched over to pre-production and it is taking the new values, the false values that I put in, just to give you an idea that these do actually update and that it will fail or it will work in a real life scenario if you have multiple environments set up. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you learned something new, and as always, stay tuned for more Wolfpack Digital news, tips, and tutorial videos to come in the near future. Bye.